Olive. Down.
All right, well, I guess, Chief, you're well more put together.
Here, I'd let you call it to order and do your official
Well,
stuff.
I guess we don't really have to call to order a work session.
Right.
Start.
All right. So bear with my mess here. First page. So as you guys know, we partnered with the town of Mills, or formerly town of Mills, city of Mills, to use their temporary animal control shelter, and we pulled away from Casper, started our own. With that, we got this letter January 13th. Without getting into the politics of things, we're not going to have their facility available to us after June 30th. And so that's what this letter essentially is notifying us. Initially, we were told they were going to try to build their own facility and move away from the temporary one to a more permanent one. The Humane Society got involved, so they took care of the animals at the facility when either us or Mills would have them there. So we were paying $15,000 to the Humane Society to go up and do that. So because Mills isn't able to move to building their own facility, the Humane Society also was going to cease taking care of said animals. So that's in part why we have that letter. So then I kind of put together a brief history, not knowing who would be in our audience. One audience person back here and or whoever's going to be on YouTube. But I think you guys came into the council after we paired or pulled away from it. So the town for something around 30 years had contracted Casper to utilize both Metro to patrol and also do sheltering of our animals here in Evansville. The costs had risen over the years to the last year where we were, I think, just over $100,000 that we spent with Casper for patrol and shelter services. So in 2019, I started assessing costs, savings, and possible effectiveness of having our own animal control services here. So in 2020, we did a restructure of a civilian position within the police department. Formerly, it was the evidence clerk. So in short, that evidence clerk position, they did 30 minutes to an hour's worth of work in a day, and then we're paying them for the rest of the time. So at the time, they would help Janice, our records clerk, a little bit, but it benefited the town to restructure that because we're already paying for that position. So that was part of that transition. So then, Mills had reached out to us and said, hey, we've pulled away. We've got this facility. We established an MOU with them. So when Brandy catches the animals, et cetera, or, they're large, we established the ownership, then, they would go up there. We already talked about the Humane Society being involved. We redid the MOU last year. So it was a once-a-year payment for Mills of $5,000 versus
$2 per day.
Per day. So there was some adjustments made, and we knew going into this that we'd have some learning curves and some ups and downs. The one thing that we did learn is it reduced our animal control costs by around $60,000 is what I'm figuring, because we were already paying for the position, which is now what, her salary, has become. So when you look at, the $100,000 a year we were spending to Casper, now we're paying, basically $20,000 to, between the Humane Society and Mills, and then we have a budgeted line in our line item for animal control services. So like vet costs and like the spay and the trap neuter program that we're doing with cats. And so with that we had about a $60,000 savings. And on top of that, we definitely improved our services to our citizens here in the community. We don't have dogs gone wild like we did 3.5 years ago, and response times are pretty good. And I think she's built a pretty good rapport with a lot of the community, and beyond the animal controlled side of it, she's taken on zone code enforcement. So as I looked at that restructure, I'm like, well, at some point I know our animals gone wild will get more contained. We'll have more of a petting zoo concept. So, to justify that position, we need something else to caveat it. And so beyond that, a lot of the cleanup that's happened within the town in the last 2 years is mainly to her and, keeping, grass and notices and stuff. So in 2021, we took 929 cases. 393 of those were animal calls. And then on the side of that, there was 237 VIN checks and 299 code enforcements. So that position itself is busy. She stays pretty busy here. During 2021, we had just over 30 dogs that went to the holding facility in Mills. And June 30th, we were also notified that the Humane Society was no longer going to care for animals. We talked about Mills already, so some of these I've already talked about, so I'm just going to bypass those. So prior to us being notified about the facility and not being able to use it, they were talking about trying to build it. I'd reached out to some of our local animal handling type folks we have here in Evansville, trying to, looking to help with the solution down the road. So in talking with the Mills chief, he's like, if we get our own facility, we'll need somebody to come in and take care of the animals as well. So I reached out to Alana that we have here. She has like a pet washing facility, and we have our pet care place over here that both animals. And both of them had voiced interest that if it was something here in Evansville, they would be interested in helping with. This one can't house animals because they board them. So like, if Janelle or, the attorney or you guys, you have vaccinated dogs and she picks up a unvaccinated dog that can bring in, which affects her business. So they were like, they couldn't come here, but if you had a facility or something like that, we would have some interest in that. So in one side of it, I was trying to help work a solution to help with Mills if they were building a facility. Obviously that fell through. And so that puts us at a crossroad about housing of animals, picked up here in Evansville. So moving on, we have a couple options to consider. One is that we build our own facility, and two, we talk to Casper, which we've talked. I've talked to the mayor. Mayor's talked to Casper about potentially going back to Casper and paying them to shelter. Basically animals per day versus what we were. So like Bar None right now pays $3,300 a month. Is my understanding, regardless of whether they have animals or not. We reached out. Casper is amenable to that. So, in looking at different options, some things I think that we should probably be considering, and to some of my own faults, I look way down the road, maybe farther than I should sometimes, but growth is one thing I think we need to consider, in these options. So in the last 10 years or so, Evansville has added a lot of homes. We have this new subdivision up here. We now have a new development going in of 84 more homes in the coming years. So a couple things, and I didn't bring up all the Humane Society stuff that I've dug up, but something. So they have a handbook designed around shelters and stuff, and they have stats that they put in there that's basically across the nation. So according to the Humane Society, 39% of homes in America have dogs. So when you think about 39% of homes, so if we add 84 homes plus we have, and granted, I don't know that Evansville per se is 39%, but it's definitely something to look at nationwide, because we're not going to see a slowdown in people moving to Wyoming for a while with the state of the world. 34% have cats, 6% have birds. So it breaks down to there's about 1.7 dogs per home in that percentage. So when you look at Evansville, so we have right now about 1,300 living units, includes the Aspens at full capacity, apartments, the trailer courts on Copper, obviously. So if that, statistically, we would have about 507 homes with a dog or a cat here in Evansville. So in 2021, just in the county, there was 92 new single-family homes built. Now, when I talk about new units, that's specifically houses. They don't include apartment buildings, and we have a ton of apartment buildings being built in Natrona County as well. And part of why I'm bringing this out is, Metro services, they service Casper, bar none, Natrona County as a whole. So if we go back to Casper and, looking down the road, how long is that relationship? Can they facilitate any, the extra pressure of animals coming in? So I think that's something we need to have a discussion on. In like Natrona County. So I talked, it would have been last year, I was talking with the guy that facilitates the ranch development up north. And during 2019 alone, they had something like 70 of those lots sold. And he was telling me then the people buying those lots are projected to build and move here within 2 years to 4 years. So on the Natrona County side, just not living units we know about, we know we're going to continue seeing all this growth, which puts pressure on the facilities that we have, here. And right now, outside of some private boarding facilities, the only animal control shelter besides the Humane Society is Metro with Casper. Abandoned dogs in Evansville. We had the temporary facility. The average was about 3 to 4 weeks before the Humane side would end up with them if we couldn't facilitate their owner coming to get them, or they weren't part of a court hearing here in Evansville. One dog had been at the Humane Society now for a little over a year, has not been adopted out. Some of that's because they had a vicious charge here, which that falls with the animal, and did not come from a good home. They didn't take good care of this animal. So the average time at the Humane Society right now is about 6 to 8 months for the dogs from Evansville to get adopted out. So the Humane Society wasn't always to immediately take some of our animals, causing them to sit in these particular shelters, because they have also their own pressure put on. They're a no-kill shelter. Metro is a kill shelter. So some of that needs to probably be considered about, when we look at what direction we want to go, because today's society versus say 50 years ago isn't as conducive to kill shelters as they used to be, and now people lean more to non-killing of animals. Obviously, sometimes you just have to put animals down simply because their demeanor, nature, and what's going on with them. So we talked about, Evansville as a whole, growing. So option 2, we go to Casper. They house our animals. They would charge us per day. The staff would pretty much take care and clean the kennels up there. Before I move into option 1, I'm going to let Brandy talk a little bit about some of the concerns with our option 2 with the shelter, because the dynamic of what our citizens are probably going to expect for us and animals. So some of the concerns, I'm going to let you handle that, and I'll let you take over for a minute.
And did you say that they would honor the $3,200 a month like bar none does?
No, so bar none is $3,200 a month, irregardless. Ours is what the mayor was told is $20 a day per animal.
What's on the sheet?
So
That would have to be a discussion. I just
yeah,
didn't really want to go before what we were, as we were at percentage. So it's how many animals versus total operating percentage throughout the year.
I know in the response, they also wanted to reserve the right to increase any particular fees in the future and that kind of stuff.
So I started this position almost 2 years ago, come June. I was new to Casper in general, so I really didn't know Metro or anything that was going on in this area. So when I first started and I was picking up animals right and left, and people were coming up to me, "Are you taking them to Metro? Are you going to kill them? What's going to happen?" So I'd explain to them kind of our situation. I take them up to Mills and that whole story. There is a lot of backlash against Metro. The shelter itself is not very well run. They have 2 employees right now that take care of all of their animals, to the point where officers are actually taking animals home because they're not being fed properly, left to water at night, not being cleaned properly, possibly due to being short-staffed as well. A lot of the vet clinics, when we first started, trying to partner with vet clinics was also very hard. I had clinics that wouldn't even come out and talk to me. I would try to make appointments. I wouldn't get phone calls back. I would actually go there. I'd be like, "I can wait, no worries." But I had a lot of pushback just from vet clinics because they thought we were kind of connected with Metro and they weren't being, I guess, properly taken care of either by Metro staffing. So we did partner with Casper Animal Medical Center, and we still are. There's Petco and PetSmart. I've talked to them about our situation. They have told me that per corporations, they are no longer able to even work with Metro. So there is concern with that as well as to why they're not able to work with them anymore. And it's not even on management level, it's on corporate level for those stores. I had
Some of that conversation came about as we were looking at, trying to work with Mills in the future, like an adoption program and, and trying to find those resources and stuff out there. So that's kind of how that conversation came about, just so you're aware. And back to her.
Both of those stores are completely on board with trying to help us out. As far as adoption stuff, they're willing to do adoption kind of clinics on the weekends, which obviously I'd be a part of, but trying to adopt dogs out if we go the route of having our own shelter. They also stated that their corporations match the price. So we pick the cost of what we want the animal to be adopted out for. They do require them to be vaccinated as well as fixed, which I do agree with that as well. And then whatever charge we put on that animal, their company backs us. So we get that much back as well to help us out, try to pay for some of those.
You're good at the moment. So before we run over option 1, and I put those backwards, unfortunately, here. One of the questions I'm sure will get asked is dog days. So right now, in the roughly 20 months that we've been doing this, we've had animals in the facility 363 days. So when looking at the costs and thinking about this stuff in the future, that will probably be part of that decision-making process. So I'm going to backtrack to option 1. We've been paying roughly $20,000 between Mills and the Humane Society to facilitate taking care of animals and housing. So I said, what if we just build our own facility, knowing some of the concerns, looking at where we're at, growth of the town, thinking about where should the town potentially be in 10, 15, 20, 50 years down the road. Part of me, I'm a development type guy. I want to see the town grow. So I think it's important to consider, do we want to continue having to rely on somebody else and or become our own independent entity so we don't have to rely on people, so that we can manage and take care of it in-house. And I said, okay, so we don't necessarily have the money sitting around to just build it, but at $20,000, if we can construct something reasonably priced, a 20-year loan, give or take the interest rate, because it could change on a whim right now with inflation. Estimated right now, if we were in about $150,000 facility, would probably cost around $12,000 a year on a biannual payment. And in speculative, if we were to build our own facility, I could see mills potentially reaching out and saying, "Hey, can we part with you?" As they don't just at current, they're like, they did their own facility, so they may want to also work with us. Speculative, I wouldn't make a decision, obviously, on speculation. So I looked out and said, okay, so we'd have our own facility. We wouldn't have to depend on anybody else. Along with the county, we're all going to see development. The CPD facility is roughly 38 years old, so we know there's going to be probably needing to be some remodeling up there at some point. The Humane Society facility was built in 2003. You think about development and aging of buildings within the county, and those are the only two right now that can do any of this. Politics of communities. I put this in here because I think it's something to consider. So, right now we have a great mayor, and we get along with pretty much everybody else in the county. But at any given time, the politics can change. If some mayor gets mad at another mayor, or somebody gets elected, or you never know how and what those relationships can do in the future. You can't. It's just like crime. You can't predict. Like this weekend's events, there's no way we can predict that was going to happen. So I think that's something that, as a town, as we look at, our citizenry, we need to keep that in mind. I reached out to both the idea of a multi-vendor build and also a one contractor builds all build. I've talked to one design outfit, estimated number, it's not a solid number, but one design or one contractor builds all, they were like $342,000, what they told me. I was like, whoa. If we went with a multi-vendor concept, and just so you can put some eyes on it, back here, if you start with this diagram right here. So as I explain this will kind of help you envision it a little bit. I reached out to Cleary Building. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with what Cleary Building is, Morton Buildings. So I've known of Cleary and Morton buildings most of my life because on farms they're very prevalent. There's the steel shell buildings, and you can put concrete floors in them. My mom and I have two of them built at our place at Glendo. And when I farmed down in Lingo, we use Cleary. Cleary's as good as Morton Building. It's just a little bit less money. So we have a Cleary dealer here in town. If we were to do a roughly 30x4 shell with a concrete floor, which they've said they would put the concrete floor in for us. So essentially, when you look at this diagram, the outside would be that Cleary building. There's also an estimate just prior to this. If you back up a few more pages, you'll see this Cleary thing here, and it kind of shows the outside. These buildings will last a long time as long as you take care of them. The initial cost on a 30x40 shell through them is about $72,000. When I talked to them about, it's been about 6-7 weeks ago when I got this, they were taking bids for or orders at that point for May, June builds. But then there's more to it, obviously, than just an outside shell. You need the kennels, different things like that. So I went back to the Humane Society shelter design manual, which I can go get if you want. It's about this thick, so I have it on my desk. And so there were some things in there. I was like, oh, we should probably take this in consideration. So like the acoustics. So when you look at this design, the reason I actually hand drew this. It's kind of cool. And then one of my officers put it in digital format. So I'm all proud of this. But so initially I was thinking about putting the kennels on the outside wall so they faced each other. Well, then dogs, when they see each other, tend to start barking and bark at each other. And then you have that back and forth acoustic. So we went and looked at the Metro facility. Theirs is similar where they don't face each other. I went online, did some research, so that's why I designed it this way. I talked to Michael's Fence. And there's a breakdown here when you get into the option one potential. So the cinder block is you figure roughly about $45 per square foot. So for this, we'd be about $9,300, give or take, for the cinder block, which you would use a different vendor or contractor to put that in. Talk to an electrician, who's obviously need electricity in there. So I also had to reach out to Rocky Mountain Power. Robert was involved with some of this. Is at this particular facility, if we chose to do this, would be over near the one lift station to the east of the Public Works, where an old kennel used to be. So we have all the utilities there. Rocky Mountain Power, if we go with just a 60-foot drop wire and a pole, it's free. If we wanted to bury it, then it's $1,500 to bury it, which, I mean, there's some advantages of burying it versus having it hang, because then you don't have the wind and stuff like that. Because it's a government building and we have employees and the public could be in there, we have to have at least a handicap accessibly bathroom. So when you look at this diagram, that's why you see that bathroom. So somebody, if they're in a wheelchair or handicap, they at least can get into the said facility, and or the employees have use of it. I haven't narrowed down the HVAC system yet. We would need a washer dryer. We're about $2,200, give or take, for an industrial grade washer dryer in there. Stainless steel sink, you can get those for about $800. Hot water on demand system versus a tank system, which was recommended because you don't need a constant tank, you just need something to come on. But if we got industrial one, it'd be about $1,900 for that to put in there, so you have hot water to clean the facilities and laundry, any rags or bedding and stuff like that. We would need a pressure washer, and researching both gas versus electric. The electric's quieter, which is less stress on your animals. So about $2,000 for that. Although we don't primarily keep cats, I can see down the road either cats, or in this weekend's incident, we have guinea pigs that we ended up having taken for a little bit. So in the Humane Society, which is they're kind of recognized as the experts in shelters and taking care of animals, cats and said animals like that need to be separated from the dogs so that they're not as stressed because of the barking, and obviously they tend to not always get along. So we might need, a cage bank or two and as you look at the diagram, you'll see a cat room here that's basically 11-foot square. So a couple of the cages would be about $2,000, $2,100. Work counter. So, if say she catches your dog, you come to get it. There's paperwork, just like when somebody gets arrested, et cetera. You always have to document everything you do. And should we do this and do our own adoption system within town, they need somewhere to do all the paperwork and coerce with the public in that sense. So initially the estimate's about $122,000 without knowing HVAC system, potentially up to $150,000. One thing about a multi-vendor build is some of this we probably would not have to bid out because it's under a $35,000 threshold. So like the Cleary building is over the $35,000 statutory stuff, where the other stuff we may have to potentially not worry about bidding. And it saves a whole lot of money from a one contractor build all. Now, should there be issues with the contractor work down the road, then obviously we have multi-vendors to deal with, where if you do a one vendor person, then you just go to them and say, hey, there's cracks or whatever. Like I can tell you, like Cleary, they built their buildings and we've never had to call them because they were just fine. Now, the other stuff, I think mostly as long as they're reputable, like Michael's Fence, they wouldn't still be in fencing business if they were a bad contractor. One of the things that I didn't put in here that we may also want to talk about, and this is part of why Robert's here. So currently, anytime the police department seizes a vehicle for search warrant stuff, we are disrupting their work environment because we're using the public workshop and we're having to move some equipment around. And the last one, and sometimes I don't always get called on this because it's stuff they don't necessarily call the chief in the middle of the night on. And then in the morning, hey, by the way, So they put it in the one bay that they knew they could access. Well, unfortunately, that particular bay, it got tied up for, was it 3 days? I think by the time the search warrant got done. So if we had a public sewer emergency, the back truck happened to be there, and well, they weren't going to get it out unless they had to move everything else out of the shop. So in looking at this, I got to thinking that beyond just dealing with a potential animal shelter, this may also be a potential opportunity to do an addition, maybe 20-foot garage onto this building, so that when we see stuff, we're not in their workspace. But we need somewhere that it's sheltered, secured, if we're going to do this. Anytime we put a seized vehicle in their shop, obviously they're taped up and they have to wait on a search warrant, but these guys are in and out. We don't necessarily want to contaminate evidence, something you definitely are probably going to understand, because sometimes there's DNA and there's drugs and there's hazards, and and sometimes the tow truck is backing in there and dropping it off because the tires are gone from the pursuit and they wrecked it in rocks, and then we have fluids from the cars sitting on their work floors. So I did want to bring that up. That's part of why Robert is here tonight. So if you have any questions of that as well.
And to go on a little bit like that with the evidence contamination, I'm not too awfully worried about that with the crew that we have now. But we have had some characters in the past that I wouldn't leave evidence in there.
Yeah, and and the thing about evidence, it only takes one screw up to basically taint your evidence chain of custody and public opinions. So in this folder I gave you, here's a thing from Casper about the Metro services and kind of what they've got going. One thing about up there is, like, they're not, because we require certain vaccinations, if anybody was to adopt out of them, as long as they're up there, they're, I think we're going to have some clashing there, because they don't have to enforce our ordinances. And we're saying, hey, if you're going to have animals, they need to be rabies and said stuff. So I think that's probably something we need to have a discussion about. They have a 9-day thing that they typically hold, where we're typically on a 5-day, because we didn't want to keep them in that facility forever to, cause problems with mills. Then, the Humane Society, if they could take them right away, great. But a lot of times they sat there for a couple of weeks on end. So that is there for your viewing pleasure and/or questions. Brandy put together an additional information thing here, so we did 46 trap, neuter, return stray cats. So that's actually, you think about it, that's a lot for our community. And that in itself was about $3,266, which eventually pays out because we have less stray cats mating and things like that. Town tags, we did 292 town tags from July 1st to February 17th, 22. So it kind of, and that clearly isn't all the animals, because not everybody's going to register with you, because some are just indoor pets and they just don't tell us. But it kind of goes to show how many registered cats and dogs, and these are majority dogs. So out of the 292, that's 262 homes. And 267 dogs. So when you go back, I talked about in the statistic of homes, let's see, back a few pages here. So by the Humane Society statistic, 507 homes with dogs, and we know of 262. So I think that shows that they're probably not too far off, but I don't think we're quite as high as what they say, because for what we don't know, we're probably around I would say we're at least in the 350 to 400 mark, give or take what we don't know that's in our community. We've only had 3 microchips implanted since we took the program over. So in the 20 days or the 20 months, or 363 days, if we paid $20 a day at 363 days, we're about $12,000 some dollars, or just shy of $13,000 that we would have expended if we partnered with Casper.
Well, not technically. because any of the, I'm assuming all these little days, I'm assuming picked up by owners. So
Right.
all those fees would pass to the owner, so. If
Right, correct.
we partnered with them, those would be the longer stays.
Right, on the technicality, you're correct. So that's kind of the baseline, lots of information to absorb, and with that, I will open it for discussion. See the wheels turning over there.
I mean, granted, I think that it's no surprise that I'm always going to think about the living human being first. I mean, obviously, but my current thought is there have been discussions in the past about trying to coordinate with other places and how that has been time consuming, and it's caused some challenges, to say the least, of trying to coordinate with everybody, that it would almost seem, granted there's the money aspect, but it would almost seem feasible to potentially work down the road and think about going with option one, to do the build out, to have it in Evansville, so that we're not relying heavily on other people. Because the one thing that you did specifically say is that the housing market's not slowing down. People are coming in. We've got more people coming into Evansville. Metro's having its issues. The Casper Humane Society is maxing out their facilities, their services. We don't know where Casper is going to be. And to my understanding, that's been the case for a while, that Casper's kind of doing their own thing and trying to navigate their own thing. So if we went with option, what is it, option two?
One,
Yeah, if we went with that option, we would still be at the mercy of someone else making choices and decisions. And I would just wonder that if we continue to do what we're doing, we would be in the boat of not getting these animals where they need to be in a timely manner and making sure that they're being taken care of. Correct?
so with option one, if we build our own facility, we did some of the legwork, hence why she reached out to PetSmart and Petco. They're willing to help us facilitate now, setting up the policy and procedures for an in-house adoption is really easy because it's cookie cutter. You can look at somebody else's already put together program and say, we like this, we don't like that. You cut and paste. We've also reached out to all the animal humane rescue societies, so you'll see that list in here. So in the $20,000 that we are currently expending between Mills and the Humane Society, if we were to build our own facility and took, say, about $10,000 of that, we could create a part-time position to help facilitate a volunteer program of people to come in to help maintain, because we don't have a ton of animals that we need a big staff in a sense. We just need a small, set, one volunteer or two potentially, and some volunteers. A lot of places have a volunteer program where like kids that are, 15, 16 or older, they come in, they volunteer their time. We had discussions about maybe even a community service, through the Corps or something like that, which obviously needs supervised. So I understand that concern, but I don't know that it's as great of a concern. You look at what we did with our program when we pulled away from Casper, and outside of the sheltering dilemma we're now dealing with, it's been pretty successful in getting the dogs under control. The community likes where we're at with it. And so I think it's one of those trails that when you go down the road, sometimes you have to branch off and take a different route, but eventually the end of the trail is great. So I see it, I hear it, I understand it. I also think we can work through it.
So then from a financial standpoint, I mean, even with all the numbers, it looks like we would be saving money in the long run if we built our own facility.
I don't know that we'd necessarily, once the facility or take a lot of that cost off. And then we're just having to deal with that position of helping to take care of animals and the volunteer side of things. So I think the cost would be same right now. What we gain at the end is the independence and not having to rely on a different entity to help us out. And then, and it's speculative because I can say, okay, we go with option 2, we sign up with Casper, we're doing this. Well, what happens in 2 years? And they say, and they do the same thing to us that Mills does. So at the cost of construction, which I think everybody understands right now, the cost of construction just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And, you know, with the federal dollar and the inflation, I don't think any of us can realize what that inflation cost is ever going to top out at right now, because they printed more money in a year than they did in 40 years. And it's never happened in our country. So if we, and speculative, because we could go with Casper and that may never happen, but we can't predict the future. So I think we're in a spot that we can choose our future. We can choose one, or we can choose to become more independent. If you want to save money, option 2. But then there's that cloud of what happens in the future. Are we going to have to revisit this in the future? We may not have to. We may have to. And that's why you, as the governing body, have to make those hard decisions. Because, you know, you are the elected people of this community. And that's why when I opened up with this discussion about, you know, I, to my own fault, sometimes look 50 years down the road versus some people only look maybe 6 months down the road. My envision is I would like to see the town be more independent, but at the end, you are the governing body.
That seems like that would make sense. I mean, whether we're looking at it from a year perspective or we're looking at it 50 years perspective, if we become more independent and we're relying on what we have specifically in the town, it would almost seem more logical to go with the route of being more independent and having the facility in town. We know that the animals are going to be taken care of. There's not going to be the what if of are they being fed, are they not being fed. I know in my own right I'd be able to sleep at night knowing that animals are getting fed, they have a warm place to sleep, things like that. But it just seems logically that we need to be making a choice and a decision that's going to A, better the town, but B, also moving us forward in a clear direction and not keep spinning the same wheel, hoping that we get a different result. We need to exert it. And I almost feel like even from like governmental standpoints, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of a thing. Well, let's stop spinning that wheel. Let's start making good sound choices that are going to move us into the direction where we don't have to keep revisiting things over and over again, and that we're making logical decisions moving forward that are going to be the betterment. Because like you said, we've got more people coming in. So the numbers, I mean, I got 2 bulldogs of my own. So, I mean, if you think about even your statistics of how many animals are in a household, you know, whether it's guinea pigs, birds, dogs, cats, whatever it might be, that number is only going to increase. My one question I do have for you is, let's say we build the facility and let's say with your mock-up design, it looked like there were 12 kennel areas. What were to happen, and this is probably a question that is not going to be answered tonight, but what were to happen if we had an abundance of an overflow and we weren't able to have enough room for additional animals? Then what would happen in regards to that?
So, actually, I can partially answer that. So this particular idea with 12 kennels is, so I looked at, okay, we had 30 XYZ dogs coming in, how long do we have them? So if we have, you know, we take, you know, Mr. Scott's dog, he gets cited for, you know, something, he's in the court system, we have to hold that dog. So I said, okay, so one side is short-term, one side potentially be long-term. If we have excess animals beyond what's in here, like Casper just had this animal hoarding thing, was it 7, 8 months ago. They didn't have the room. They had to reach out to people to help them. In those circumstances, people step forward. So we go back to that list of shelters and rescues.
And I have talked to some of them where
She
they would be open if we did come into a situation. to
and
be able to help.
she just took was it 1 or 2 dogs at the Sheridan?
2 dogs.
2 dogs. So we had a case. The dogs were surrendered.
They were considered vicious, and the Humane Society or Metro and even some of the local just people that help out with fostering, once those charges are on the dogs, it's very hard to get them adopted out. The shelter in Sheridan is the only one in Wyoming that has a adoption process for white dogs. So their staff actually works with these dogs to try to turn them around. Now, every case is different, and that might not work, but I told Chief when this incident happened, these were puppies, less than a year old, that were mistreated. It wasn't the animal's fault, and I was not okay with putting them down. So he did give me permission to reach out, and so I did call some facilities and found one in Sheridan, and they ended up taking the dogs.
So I'm not aware of any hoarding issues within our community. Doesn't mean it can't happen in the future, but should we ever have that particular incident, there's resources. So if we end up overcapacitating what we build, part of the reason I also looked at the Clary steel building concept is if we ever needed to expand the facility, because it's like modularly built, you could easily do an addition to it and just add on if needed. I don't see that we'll need to expand it for a while. Say that cautiously, because if we were to do that, I'm pretty confident this should be suffice for a while.
The cases where I've had dogs stay up there for a while is because they're going through court cases, and it gets extended, and working with them and everything.
Now, taking on our own adoption program, we can curtail it to how we want to do it. I know some people have voiced frustration of adopting through Metro or Humane Society and the requirements. And in fact, before I got my puppies, I even considered adopting a dog. And after I looked at it, I'm like, because the money you spend in itself. These dogs need to be loved, but by the time you go through that ridiculous process, so we don't have to charge as much, and we can say, yeah, you need to get them spayed, neutered, and whatever, but we don't have to charge as much. We can streamline it and make it a friendlier environment in some aspects, so that it's easier to get them out and adopted. I think that's one of the benefits also that we can bring within our own facilities, is we control. We don't have to rely on somebody else.
But making sure that the animals get adopted to people that are not going to.
I can
Right.
hold you on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A
So-
non-negotiable.
There's forms in here that we kind of made, just put in here of like what a person would go through to adopt out a dog and to adopt out a cat. And there's kind of trick questions in there too. For me personally, with a cat, if you are, say if you're wanting this cat for an outdoor cat, but then you also want to get it declawed, like that's not okay by me. So in that instance, you're not going to have this cat. Just household information, like how many kids are in your home, like knowing the background of the dog, which sometimes we don't know. So, just judging what I know of the dog and then the family by filling these out kind of gives me information as to whether or not this would be a good fit.
So we put that in there because I knew those questions would come up. But the first hard decision is, what direction does the town want to go? If you go with Casper, it's pretty simple. We work out a deal, we sign some paperwork. If you want to do a facility, if that's the decision you make, the rest of it will come easy because we know where we're going. And since we already kind of have the paperwork designed. At that point, we just have to work out policy and procedures, and like our animal ordinances prior to taking over, we had to create. So that's, at this point, I think it's a mood issue. I mean, it's a concern. I understand it, but it's a small bump. It's a small worry right now versus the big decision. So.
Since I started this job, we've had a lot of positive feedback from separating from Metro. And I think if, my personal opinion, if we went back to Casper, there's going to be a lot of unhappy people. And with that being said, I didn't sign up to work for a kill shelter. So if we did go back to Casper, I would potentially want something in there stating that any from Evansville will not be put down. Whether that's they're in the shelter for 3 years, a year, 6 months, what have you, and it's becoming aggressive or something, or the judge deems it, we need to put it down. But I did not sign up for a kill shelter.
You know, my thought on all this stuff is, in logistics and all the, you know, budgets and everything like that, it's, you know, I know the chief in his hiring process, he hired, you know, you, Brandy, to do a job, and if you believe that this is the route that we need to go, I'm gonna back that up as the governing body. You know, I wanna do that. If chief, you say that this is, you know, kind of expanding out to looking into the future, I like to look into the future also, because we are building, you know, new homes in our town. We want to make sure that our town is taken care of, because our town, you know, even though we're small right now, we all take care of each other. It seems like, you know, it's one of the main reasons why I wanted to be part of the, you know, governing body. I like that route. Is, you know, building our own facility if we can manage that, you know, budget wise and everything like that. I think being separate from all those other, you know, being more independent ourselves is the right route. And I agree with, you know, Randy on, you know, we don't want to venture out back to somebody that we already left for reasons. I don't know where all this got to, so.
So from the financial standpoint, because I'm in an agreement that I do think that we should be independent. From the financial standpoint, what would that even look like? Are we talking about loans, or what exactly are we looking like?
Yeah, I mean, unless we're looking at cutting the department, this money's not there. I think we have to look at it eyes wide open, because honestly, this is a low end investment. When we look at these pieces and all the extras in there, we're gonna be higher. So I moved it to 150 grand, realistically, when we put all the pieces together. In one way or the other, I'll also be honest, we are gonna have to use gas, at least in the beginning, because we can't put this together by July 1st. There's just no way.
That's what
So,
I was gonna ask too, Chief. If we do, go back to Casper even for a few months, what's the estimate timeframe are we looking at? to go back?
Well, and that's a good question. So it depends on which route you go. If you want to do one contractor does all, which is more expensive. One guy, go to this page here. Dream Construction, and I don't have his estimate in here because he's not gotten it to me, but he's telling me, you know, with this, we would have to do a bid process and go through all that. Once that bid is, I mean, he's excited. He's like, you know, if we get this, he thinks he could have it done mid to late summer is what he's telling me. Now, we all know how construction goes. And he could have it done in 2 months, and then it could take 8 months. So in theory, I can answer it, but I can't answer it because it depends on how we decide to do it, if that's the direction you want to go. Now, like a multi-vendor build, I talked to Robert. Some of the stuff like the plumbing, these guys can dig the trenches in some aspects. The internal building of things like the walls, depending on what the county permitting process and discover building, we may have to contract out, but like Mark with the fire department, he's pretty good with that drywall stuff. So if we could, so some of that we could do in-house, I think, people willing to build some of that, which could eliminate some of the cost or slow it down. But of course, then it's time dependent as we can work on it. So if you do a multi-vendor build or design build, if you want to call it that, I could see it potentially being done by the fall. I understand we're coming into the construction business. So one particular person I reached out to, he was really nice. He came in, he sold me a good, interested, and then I never heard back from him. But what these two guys told me, and the reason I have them in here is because they were pretty straightforward. Pretty much said, if you're not doing a $500,000 build, most people here won't talk to you. So because we're not into that, but these two guys are. So I said, okay. So I learned something. So I think that either direction we go, at the earliest would probably be in the late summer into the fall months before it would be finished. I think it's just going to be dependent on who can do what, when, and where for us. So multi-vendor, obviously we'd have different people. So I reached out to. It's in here. There's a quote from an electrical outfit. Yeah. So when you look at it, there's two different quotes combined into one. When you look at that, so when you look at the 12,000, that's not the actual number, because if they did, it's basically what I showed them the Cleary building. I said, we just need a couple, and vision. So I said, we need like an outside light. We need lighting above the kennels, some electrical sockets within the building. So like, if you got a vacuum or, back where the washer dryers, you can plug it in. So he quoted about $6,000. And then the bottom one, the 6,500 is with underground services. So they ended up having to go underground. Then it's a little extra money. So that's why there's two numbers in there. And let me tell you, like Envision, I called them up and said, hey, we need, here's what we're looking at. This is the dilemma I'm running into. But before I can have an educated discussion with the governing body about numbers, I need an estimate. What is it going to cost? And like within, I think, 2 or 3 days, they came out. I met with them. They walked over the area. They looked at the lift station and the breakers in there, as to like maybe tying into that versus another pole. But because of the importance of a lift station, we don't want it to interfere, because we don't sort of backing up and that kind of stuff. So it was kind of a executive decision on the quote to say we're not going to tie into that. And Robert concurred with that because he has to deal with that problem. But all the people in here, like Michael Spence, when I first reached out to them just to talk with them, and they're just one of many vendors here. He was out with COVID initially, so it took me a little longer to get some numbers from him, but I was able to go in and he's like, and I don't think I put a copy of it, but I've got a little scratch diagram on my desk. And he's like, okay, well, if you do 3-foot cinder block with so much chain link above it with a gate, it's this much per square foot. And if we do all chain link, and at that point I hadn't read the deal about the acoustics in there and that stuff. Well, then after I read that in that build design concepts, I was like, well, if you put in chain link, then you got to put in something so they don't see each other, but it does. So we just reverted right back to center block. So the Michael's fence stuff would actually be reduced in cost from what's in here, because they would really only have to do the gating at the beginning or the entrance area of it versus because everything else would be center block. Kennel cough, the medical side of things. So if you do chain link, and even if you put in partition like polymer or something, you still can have cross contamination of kennel cough. And then if you're washing your kennel out and something goes from one kennel to the next, you have cross contamination. So in the long term consideration, that the cinder block's the better for the health of the animals.
Now, is there anything like, and this is just me just thinking out loud a little bit, Is there any kind of grants or anything that we can, ask our grant writer about?
Well,
Look into?
if we had a prior existing facility that was damaged by a natural disaster, yes.
COVID.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, COVID.
I-
have-
So there is this, it's ARPA and it's SLFRF funding that's available right now through Natrona County. And I have contacted them on some other projects to see if they have determined the eligibility of those funds. There's a couple different ways that counties can disperse them. There are 4 eligible funds, like types of funding, like water and sewer treatment stuff, and emergency services and things like that. But if counties decide to take all the money and then just basically retitle it as lost revenue, then they can do whatever they want with it. So I can follow up with the county and see if they have decided what they're going to do with it or how they're going to accept it from the state and the feds. And then if they've decided to just retitle it as lost revenue, then there's a potential we could write an application. I don't know if they've even decided because it's still up in the air about who's really going to disperse it.
And there is a whole lot of stuff still shaking out everywhere. So what's there today is going to be different than what's going to be there tomorrow. We're seeing there's there's money out there right now that don't even know where it's going to go or how it's.
But it's definitely not, it's definitely worth keeping our eyes on for stuff. And one area where I think we could recoup some funds eventually if the council's decision is to build our own facility is through the court system, we do charge fines and fees. And instead of, paying mills those fees, we can pay incurred fees to ourselves through our own facility. Or, if it's a requirement that one of the dogs you seize becomes microchipped, we could ask the court to rule that before it be released, it be microchipped and spayed or whatever, and it'll cost this much. And that's a requirement of reimbursement. And since it's kept in-house, we could then facilitate that be seen through to the end.
And that is, if you look at like Casper's proposal and what we're at with mills today, where I pointed out the dogs that are there for a few days, all those fees go to the owner. The owner pays those fees. So they're not transferred on to the town. So in this case, any dog that was there for 2 days and the owner picks up, because we'd have to set up a fee system just like us, mills had $10, Casper had $20. And then basically the owner for picking up that dog would be charged for that, and that would come back into the town. So those fees would be recouped by the town.
And just with talking with Petco and PetSmart, they have mentioned to me that if I reach out to corporation and tell them what our plan is, that there is a potential that they might help us. 2 of the vet clinics, the one that we're partnered with, Casper Animal Medical Center and Westside Animal Clinic, both of their clinics have expressed interest in either the dog park potentially or a shelter. And I think if we put it out there, if we want to go the route of trying to get support for all this, I think we'd have it. I don't know how much.
Sure. A little bit.
Have
Sounds better than none.
So,
So the other thing do we have sewer and water over there?
Yes.
We do. Okay.
Now, whether the condition of said
It's
services,
usable.
Yeah.
the taps are there. I can't tell you the conditions. It's still a little early in the year to be poking around with that.
The other component I think that we need to take into account and make sure that we're looking at here is we've reached out to volunteers to help with the feeding, cleaning, maintaining. I would anticipate a lot of times that doesn't last. So as we talked about possibility, I would assume at some point in time, staffing is going to be an issue or something that we would have to have. When you look at the cleaning, feeding the animals, things like that, as well as potentially if we
Yeah.
did get into adoption situations.
If we did like a part-time position or probably to some degree a contract, was just like Alana was interested, as long as she didn't have to drive to mills, she was interested in doing that and being paid for it. So on a part-time position, we don't have to do the health insurance and all that stuff. So that, if that's weighing in your mind, so.
But I think that's something we need to consider. 'Cause I would,
I
See
think
us
that
heading.
you're gonna need to have at least one.
Do I like the idea of having to borrow money to do it? No, absolutely not.
No, but I think that being a municipality, you're tax-free. You can borrow at some pretty good rates. So sometimes you just gotta spend money to make money.
But there are options to potentially see if there could be support.
Yeah.
To recoup some of that money.
So,
I will reach out to whoever.
Yeah.
Whoever you
I
want.
mean, it may not be everything, but anything's going to help. And, and I say at the beginning, the decision comes down to you don't spend as much in one place versus your independence on the other. And what is that worth to the community? That's really the decision you have to make.
And I think having the support of Petco and PetSmart, being such big corporations, is huge.
Well, and like I said, Chief, is, if you go with the clearing model, you can expand it if you need to. I like the idea of eventually maybe expanding to the garage to help you guys out too, because that does put a damper on, all the work to there if you do have a vehicle or anything in there. I do like that. Who knows what the future brings to our little town.
I didn't get an estimate from Cleary to do that, but looking at the square footage costs on the Clerk one, I think it would push us up to about $92,000 for the shell, maybe potentially $100,000 by the time you do a garage door and stuff. If we were to include it in this project, but I don't think it'd be that big of a deal to look at it down the road either, because you can just expand on.
I would be curious to just see the difference in price, because if it's not that much, it's totally worth doing it now. Instead of
We have to
hiring.
bid this one way or the other.
Mhm.
So that process has to be done because
Right.
legally that's the process we have to do. And you can always bid with an option. So you can have that in there so you get to see both components of it.
I like that.
I will reach out tomorrow and have them resubmit another one with the addition of, I got to thinking, I'm like, okay, of all the vehicles that we're going to seize, I mean, yeah, we could seize a semi, which is a rarity. So that, in that case, we would have to go over there, but everything, I mean, the biggest vehicle we're going to look at is a crew cab long box pickup. So as long as we accommodate that, we should be able to accommodate most every other type vehicle, or potentially two in there if we have that. But so far, it's just been one vehicle at a time. So.
My only
Thanks.
other
You
question.
jinxed me.
Yeah. My only other concern, Chief, is do you think that the residents around that little area is going to be affected, and are you guys I mean, we don't know if they're going to have complaints, but with the acoustics inside, we got to think about it from the outside. If there's gonna be-
So that was part of why I looked at that area too, because we only have, was there 1, 2, 3, we've got 3 residents that would be right across the street. At this point, I didn't consider any outside pins simply because the security of stuff. So as I was reading through the Cool Little Humane Society guidebook that's about this thick, they were talking about a lot of people are now moving to indoor type stuff simply because if I get your dog, you show up going, oh, I want to see what you have for adoption, so you can figure out where they're at. So on the outside pins, and they're breaking in on the outside pins and taking your dogs back. So I looked at that because part of me says we should have an exercise area, which we could do an outside thing, but that way the dogs aren't in and out. So the majority of the sound would be contained inside the building. And, of course, at nighttime, if we have some cool little motion censored light, then the lights go off and they most likely will sleep.
I
most
had
of the
an
time.
idea brought to my attention. It'll add to your cost though. Next to the dog park.
It's actually what I was just
I
on
was
the maps.
We
Maybe
might
it's a little
need
farther
to check
away,
with the
But
zoning and ordinances around that area to see if we have to notify the residents.
It's public, it's also in public, but we won't have to go through it.
Process.
Process.
So if we put it by the dog park, And
Then
That's
you are
gonna-
gonna need water and sewer.
yeah, that would expand the costs substantially to have to run the utilities over there.
The only reason I was thinking that is if you did have volunteers taking care of the animals, things like that, they've got somewhere to go. I think if you do this, you've got to have some sort of outdoor area, whether it's
Right.
accessible all the time or something you can block off so that they're not going in and out. But
So another facility I'm familiar with, what they did, so they had their building and they had a fenced area. So like the entrance door, they had a walkway. So there was a gate here and then each side there was a gate. And so when you came in, once through here, you could close it secured, but that was the exercise area. And, then once they're in here, obviously they're in here. So if they're exercising them as either volunteers or somebody wants to get to know the animal on adoption, but putting that in, I don't see that being too much more expensive. I mean, well, depends on whether you do concrete or if you do gravel with dig barrier. If you do gravel with dig barrier, then it's not near as expensive.
I would think that you want some sort of outdoor, for the sake of the animal. They're not always locked up in there, especially if you have one that's going to be there for an extended period of time.
Right.
Having some method to get out.
Yeah.
I think from a public health, like feces standpoint, you have to, I think we have to.
And they don't necessarily have to, but that is I get the whole breaking and entering thing, but also I think they do need an outside space too.
So,
Whether you put barbed wire at the top to make sure
yeah,
crazies
So I-
don't get in. But
I think, as long as we have somewhere we can let them out and let them run for a
Even
little
if you
bit.
take them in out the main door.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, just have a place you can take them where they got the ability. And I know from us, getting to know the dog. We've had dogs that we've looked at that are great, perfect. We want to get them outside, get them with our existing dogs, and not always does that work well. But having that ability to take the dog out, but animals need each other, things like that, determine how that's going to work out.
that was a concern that someone had with Metro just a couple weeks ago, that they have an outdoor facility, but they don't utilize it very well or every day with these dogs because they are short staffed and they're at capacity, from what this post had said. But just that they're not being taken outside. And like you said, if they're in closed in area, no sunlight, nothing. So
And there's something we have to think of because we're going to be in the same boat. Because we're not going to have staff to take care of this. So you're going to be looking at really relying on them volunteers to walk the dogs, things like that, get them out. But I am also concerned with the proximity of the houses. So depending on how the sound would travel, I think during the day, not as big a deal, but if the building doesn't contain the sound in the evening, I assume that's going to be very disruptive.
So in theory, when you look at this, so as this sits, this end here where the like the bathroom and stuff would be towards where the residence would be. And so your entrance, so like the lift station would be here, this would be your entrance. So you'd have some interior distance, and as they're barking, I mean, yeah, they twist and turn, but the majority of the sound would be going this way. I talked to Clary about the spray insulation. So these walls, so the outside walls, and then they do spray insulation with a metal interior as well. So that would be a pretty good sound barrier. So I don't think it'd be like they're outside barking. And there probably will be some barking in the daytime, but I think that's gonna be pretty well muffled.
What's the distance from the road?
We haven't actually calculated that yet, but I would estimate, so from the north edge of the road, you got what, 10 feet to the fence? And then from the fence, probably another, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 feet. I mean, that actually can probably be picked at this. I mean, you can decide that because there's the old kennel thing that would need knocked down. So I think, we could probably push a little ways south if needed be.
That was the other idea, if it can move a little farther with the
Yeah.
road. I think the more separation that would be created between this and the residents.
Now, if we're going to consider adding a area to secure vehicles, then this end would actually need to be more this way. Because if we're towing a vehicle in, they've got to have room to come around and back into it, where if you put it on this end, with the fence and stuff, they wouldn't be able to get in and do that. So if that becomes a consideration, then it has to be shuttled this way. If we don't consider it, we can shuttle it this way. And I suppose technically we could even turn it. I mean, wow, there's enough land down there. I mean, we can turn it if
You
you
could lay it down sideways if you wanted to.
So, I mean, you could do it this way, so it's facing that direction.
In my opinion, I think the steps are to kind of get a better idea of where this is gonna be. Maybe bring in the architects, bring in Shane and them to kind of help look at placement, where facilities are, because Shane's gonna have a really good idea of what it would cost to move it over here, what it would cost to move anything, even down by the dog park, things like that. The cost per square foot for these types of things. So that would give us a better idea of what we're looking, and then we can produce something to a bid to go out for that. I mean, because he can, that's what he does all the time. So I think that'd be very beneficial to loop them in, kind of get the 2 cents. Because there's a lot of other pieces to this. There's soil conditions on where you can build.
Well, that's one of the things I was gonna bring up, about all that contamination from Texaco
Um,
and the lagoon.
There's other intangibles. I mean, well, not intangibles, but we had a building, town's gonna insure it. We're gonna have fire protection. We would have to have it in the building as well.
I don't know that we have to have it.
You don't think so?
I talked to Leo. He was going to look into it, but his initial thoughts was that because we don't have a set, people capacity, and because of what it is, that we may not actually have to have a fire protection in there. He hasn't confirmed it, but that was his initial thoughts.
I just assumed all of our buildings had to be monitored. I guess.
So
He'd know better than I.
Well, monitored or sprinkler?
I was just looking at monitoring.
Are you talking?
I talked
monitored?
sprinkler.
Yeah, didn't even head down that road yet.
Yeah.
Monitoring we might on the monitoring, sprinkler, like.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, monitoring's way cheaper than sprinkler.
I think we pay.
$20 a month here and there is all gonna add up.
I think
Yeah.
we pay $360, $350 a year to have that fire for monitoring.
For all of them? Oh, for just communities?
Just the community center.
Why not monitoring? Your facilities?
Water plants monitor. But I don't know if it's fire. It might just be.
But at any rate, I mean, it's all these little things I think that we need to look at so that we're getting a full picture of what the whole package is. Like I said, I don't see any way, shape, or form we're not going to be even short term utilizing Casper to get us there, because there's not enough time in the day once we start looking, putting all the plans on. I mean, the bid process alone takes weeks or months. So that's before we can even tell somebody, I don't know, get started.
No, it's okay.
Land over there.
She's,
She's over there. She was-
But then we can also
She
use
comes
that
to work
as
with
an
me every day.
opportunity to explore funding options, whatever else we can reach out, talk to partnerships, things we can do to help mitigate some of the costs.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something that we need to dig into. And I like the being independent. And I think it should be a route that we head down, absolutely.
It's just a good feeling, knowing that you don't have to rely and deal with stuff. 'Cause let me tell you, when this letter came, I was like, seriously? Like, I didn't even get a courtesy phone, because generally the mills chief and I have a pretty good working relationship, and and he didn't give me the courtesy of, hey, it isn't me, just so you know, it's somebody else. A courtesy call would have been nice. So when you get this letter, it's like, really? So it and think, even in your own personal life, sometimes it's just nice to have that sense of security, even if you have to borrow a little money so you don't have to deal with things down the road. You're just independent.
So, Leah, what else, from a legal standpoint, do we need to have into consideration? Like the adoption process, when you're evaluating an animal for temperament, things like that.
I think that the main things there is we're gonna need to have liability waivers for all volunteers and employees that are specifically tied to the potential risks around being around an animal. And I'm sure that we can, talk to the Humane Society and I can look at other examples. For people that are gonna come look at an animal for adoption, they'll also need to sign a liability waiver just because the risk of, a bite or something like that can be pretty high. And we would just need to ensure the town will be absolved of all liability.
Would we incorporate like an adoption event? Or something like that?
Anyone who comes to the event signs a waiver.
Okay. Keep the
Yeah.
dog separate, sign a waiver, then.
Yep, when you go in, you just say, these are our rules, this is the waiver we sign. If you wanna see the dogs, it's just how it is.
Pretty simple.
If people fill out a form prior to the adoption event, like online or something, we can have the waiver attached and they can sign it on there too. I think beyond that, I think we can just establish some better kind of forms for kind of like a check-in form for the dog that would have some areas where the employees and you could fill out characteristics and have kind of a bio on them. So then that would help us understand which dogs only certain people should handle if they have specific training or something.
That would be another benefit to having our facility here. It's like when she's off duty, the officers are typically dealing with stuff. And so the keys to the truck are downstairs and currently, anytime they change something over there, it doesn't always carry over. So having it in-house, the guys, it's pretty simple. It's a short run. So if something like this weekend comes up again, they're not stuck in Mills or somewhere else. Then they're already right here in our community, and it's a pretty simple system that we can govern on. Hey, you took this call, you checked, you got the dog, you filled out the paperwork, and then when she comes on, it's systematic.
Set up appropriately, it's something that they can be doing on their phone while they're working with the animal.
Out there.
And even from like the public standpoint, right now, to me, Mills isn't that far. It's 15 minutes. I lived in big cities, so that's not far at all. But people around here, they're like, oh my gosh, you're making me go all the way to Mills. And it is a process right now because I do have them come downstairs, fill out paperwork, get the animals registered to the town. And then they go up to Mills Police Department, pay what they have to pay towards Mills, and then an officer takes them over to the shelter. So it is a multi-step thing. We've tried figuring out how to eliminate some of it, but it just hasn't worked yet. So
That said, though, we do have a really high rate of return, which is good.
I was actually just getting ready to tout that. One of the things whenever I talk to everybody is our return rate. And Brandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the vast majority of animals get back home. So when we're talking about the housing and things like that, I think that drastically reduces that they probably would be there for a short period of time if they're not chipped or while we're trying to find that home. But I know Brandy's really good at getting out on social media, stuff like that. I know my wife shows me every dog picture that's ever put out there. Luckily, most of the owners are claiming them, so they don't all live in my house. But that's another thing to consider is that for the most part, I think that hopefully we don't have dogs there overnight and things like that. The concern I would have, which I think would reach out to you guys, is that it's the long terms, that we would have to have some sort of mechanism on what we can do with them because we won't be equipped to keep dogs years. I mean,
Right.
Pretty soon
and
you're.
that's like with Petco and PetSmart, a lot of people. So they said if you set up an adoption event on a Saturday, 12 to 4, they'll help advertise this. We can wait until we get 3 or 4 dogs.
I think we'll just need to develop a policy for the shelter and we'll just have to make a decision about what's the time cutoff.
Right.
Don't get adopted after a certain amount of time, we're gonna just have to, but you've already been so good at finding other options.
Yeah.
And that's where my biggest concern would be the animals that are
Right.
more temperamental.
Yeah, once you know, once we set the policy, it says, okay, if they've been surrendered, whether via volunteer or through the court or found we can't find an owner, that we will only hold them so long if they're not adopted after a month or two or whatever. That at that point, that's the trigger to start looking at,
Right.
you know, this. Now, I would like some of these are really great outfits. Like when I was on the other side of the state, we routinely used Bear Lake over at Garden City, Utah, and which was work because sometimes you get inundated with animals in your community. So if you can't get them adopted, at least somewhere else somebody's going to adopt them. We either went to Rock Springs, Bear Lake. We had a few we even took clear down into Utah. It is expensive. You pay for fuel, but at the end, the animals taken care of, and they eventually end up in a home. And not that we have a ton of that here, we just had one batch to Sheridan. So,
And I think trying to get them out of the kennels falls back into getting some of the ordinance changed as well with our court systems. Not letting these cases drag out for a while and giving them more lenience and more lenience. Because when these animals do sit in the shelter, that's when their temperament changes. And I have seen it plenty of times in my past even. You have a dog up there who gets, ultimately taken from its home, and it's in a solitary in this kennel, not a lot of interaction, that dog changes. And the longer it stays up there in the kennel, the harder it is to get them adopted. So the quicker I can get them out based on our court systems, that's my goal, is to kind of speed up the process on some of the court issues to get them to the point of being adopted so they're not sitting in there.
Well, my guess is that's something we can do with ordinance, that if we have a dog, it starts clock. So that would be my guess. I
Yeah.
don't know that for sure, but I'm
It's supposed to be that
relying on
way.
somebody else. So I guess that's my thoughts, is start getting more information down in there. In the meantime, we're going to have to solidify something, I think, for the short term.
Yeah, I think
They don't
that
take
we
care
just
of
gotta take them to the castle for a little bit.
Yeah.
But
They-
if people are upset about it, they can come to the council meetings and voice it, and you guys can let them know that you're working on alternatives and you
Well, and
recognize
I
it.
think
I mean, if we have it in plan that we are gonna build our own shelter, I mean, if people ask me, I can say, hey, we are using this temporarily, but this is the plan. And if
I think
I don't
that
wanna go, oh, guys, sorry, I was kidding, the dog's gonna stay with it.
will
Casper, so,
appease the masses.
Well, we can't guarantee if this all comes back $500,000,
yeah.
all
that's
that.
true.
Yeah.
But I mean, with the intention, in good faith, that we're doing our due diligence, making sure that we get all the information necessary. And
I think one of
it's
the
not
legal
like we have other alternatives.
Yeah.
And I think one of the legal things we probably do want to make sure we're covering is if we do a multi-vendor build, if I read the statute, it's $35,000 expenditure. So if we do it at a loan cost, does that mean everything has to be bidded or just the primary thing that's over 35,000? Because everything else is under 35,000, even though it's within. So it's like the vehicle build leases. So we buy a car, we upgrade it for the, it's two different vendors, but then they build the car into one lease. So would we necessarily have to bid out everything or just the initial shell of the building with the stuff?
Wouldn't think so, but I would
I would need
look at
to.
a lease.
I mean, if we're actually hiring the vendor ourselves individually, if it's below 35K, we do not have to bid it out. But if they're going to if it's over 35K and they're subcontracting out a portion of it that's under, we still have to bid it.
Okay.
So we just
Yeah.
need to see what looks like it's the most feasible for us and the most time efficient.
But if we do the multi-vendor approach, the smaller ones, anything over 2,000 can be done off of quotes.
Yeah, it's like, pressure washer and that stuff. I mean, that's,
We got to get straight quotes to
yeah,
be legit. But
I mean,
stuff can all be done.
the most expensive part of the whole thing would be building shell with the flooring, and then probably the cinder block kennels themselves. I think everything else would be,
Also, depending, just like with the side building, things like that, we can specify in a bid that we want options. So, because a builder putting in concrete, putting in shell, might do cinder block walls pretty cheap. So having that option in the bid is one less that you have to go out separate.
And I can ask Cleary if they would consider the cinder block, because they said they would do the floor. So if they would do the floor, they may consider the cinder block. So
We just have to see what makes sense.
I'll reach out to them tomorrow.
I think one of the other important things about bidding it out is because I guess this weekend at the home show, our contractor said that normally he writes a bid, a quote for 90 days. And right now, he's only writing it for 10 days, and he's hoping he doesn't lose his pants on that 10
Yeah.
days. Because prices are all
Right.
over the place, and so I think by bidding it out with a bid bond in place,
Well, one of
that
the
solidifies us a little bit. You know?
Yeah, one of the nice things I think about if we do it this way with like Cleary, one thing I found with them, they're pretty consistent when they give it. That's what it's going to be. So even if we just did the shell and they did the floor, then we're not having to stress as much about the other aspects of it because we at least have that in place, and then we can work on facilitating the rest of the vendors to go in.
And there's things I think you can do. You might get contractors who really like the idea and would give just kind of rate to help do some work. Or a plumber
Potential.
comes in and cheaper work.
The other thing we may not do, if we go into the winter, as far as finishing the inside, we would have some contractors that are looking for that inside
We're
work.
not busy.
Correct.
Usually concrete.
But I think to me, that's the way to go. You can't take a two-pronged approach. We look at, and I'm sure we're gonna have to write something up to first take an agreement. And just kind of also, I think involving Shane's gonna be very helpful. He'll kind of give us some direction, point us out, and then work on put together a bid. See where we're at.
Sounds good.
I think the internal stuff, like you said, I mean, whether it's just the shell that we bid and all the rest is not done off the folks internally.
And I'm great at painting. I've been doing a lot of it lately. So
Painting sounds like a really good community event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
The whole-
I got a
Mayor, do you
paint
wanna
gun and
reach out to Pat Whisper and Metro and kind of say that in the interim, we are going to go with them from July 1st.
I know what they're gonna say. But give us, propose the contract.
Okay, that's what I was
they're
gonna say. Would you wanna do it?
And I actually, when I spoke with them, I had mentioned, that there's a likelihood that this would be a short-term type of thing while we get on our feet. Because I knew as soon as we got this letter, that we were gonna be hard pressed to make something happen by July 1st.
Yeah, no way.
Being in government as long as I've been, I know the
I
process
mean, we at
and
least.
how long things take.
I was
Sure, the month.
optimistic that they were going to build something over in Mills, but my gut kept telling me we were going to end up doing this conversation that we're having. And so I kept staying optimistic, and well, here we are. So,
Is everybody good with that?
I like the idea, 'cause yeah, it's a needed thing. At least we need to try.
Am I good at this point to start reaching out to different places?
I think so, especially, I mean, if you're talking the financial
Yeah.
support, things like that,
Mhm.
absolutely. Those are great things for us to look at, what opportunities are out there.
yeah, because we can start getting, even if they would just give us pledges that says, hey, if you're doing this, we'll pledge so much when you get to this point.
It's very well, and yeah, I would say we need to get calling out and look at opportunities. You
Yeah.
never know. We met today about orchards. Bringing orchards in around the
I
community.
need to
garden.
talk to them about ballistic. I found this really cool ballistic shield concept after this weekend's events. I had already been looking at it, but after this weekend's events, I said, we need that. And it's this really cool level 3 ballistic stuff where like 2 guys can carry it, but then you have the entire team on the other side and just walk it in instead of trying to hold these big things and have your gun. So they can just sit there and hold it and everybody else does that stuff. It's cool stuff. It's expensive, but we're going to need a grant for it.
Well, there are grand opportunities out there. I didn't get a chance to talk to Colin about it, but I know.
Yeah.
he's somebody I thought about it.
So,
Well, I guess if everybody's thumbs up, we make no decisions at the work session. Finish
I
off the direction.
like that direction that we're wanting to go into. So. Take care
So,
of our little four-legged for babies sometimes.
well, like I said, I think I commend Brandy and the program for
Absolutely.
how many animals that we get back.
Oh, yeah.
In my experience talking to people, it's unheard of what you're doing. So, the amount of animals you get back home and don't go into the shelter is amazing.
We've had some growing pains, but it's been good.
Well, I think we stress and continue that,
Yeah.
because that just keeps the load off of anything.
It's
So
like people in the right position. So,
animals at home are better than animals in cages.
Exactly.
So real quick, our other agenda item.
Do you guys need me for this? I was.
No, I don't think so. Sorry. Keep you tied up on a Monday evening? Since we probably, well, we will be back next Monday.
I will be back because Scott is going out of town.
Did you happen to see my email? about
Yes, and
this?
we talked about it, and he said he was going to look at it because he'd already talked to that guy.
Great.
So, but I will bug him about it if I don't see anything by like Wednesday. and then
Okay.
Take a look.
Great.
Sometimes it's nice since he's kind of said he's already familiar with it. So
That's why I included
I will
both of you, because
defer it.
you guys each do one thing or
Yeah.
another.
I will
figure
bug
between
him
the two of
about
you.
it, though.
So the second item was, we've got next year our 100-year anniversary. So, of course, I think we want to celebrate that. 100 years of town, pretty big deal. It's a big Herculean effort. I know I saw what Mills had done with theirs and put it together. I thought the best way to approach and handle this was to look for a citizen committee put together, hopefully kind of driven by one of us. And then that way we can get the citizens' involvement, coming up with ideas, what we want to do for this, and potentially even pitch to council for funding. My thought was, I don't think I've told Janelle this yet, but we're getting into the budgeting, things like that. So I'd like for us to look at setting aside a pot of money while we're doing the budgeting. But by no means is that, this is just throw some money out there. But depending on what the citizens, everybody wants to put together and what we want to put on, may require some additional funding. But really a group that can paint a picture, kind of decide what it is we want to do for our 100th anniversary. Plan it. So we're, is it May? So we're a little over a year ahead. So we have plenty of time, but I know that can slip through our fingers very quickly.
It's a lot to plan that stuff.
It is, depending on the complexity and how.
So the 100th is next year?
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. What exactly did you guys do? Like, I know what they did, but
didn't they?
I know what they did, so I'm not gonna backtrack on that. I know what they did, but
There was a lot. that they put
Fireworks,
Yeah.
concerts.
And Sarah Evans,
and how much?
car
did they-
show.
I mean, from a financial standpoint, how much did they, because I know they have all the different bells and whistles and all this stuff, but from a budgeting standpoint. Oh, okay.
I, by no means do I feel like we are looking to keep up with the Joneses.
No,
My-
because that'd be conformity.
Yeah,
That's not good.
my thought was is that, we just kind of look at our thing, what do we want this to look like? I can tell you right now, I wouldn't want to stick a huge chunk of money into it because we've got other opportunity, other places, obviously, where our money could, needs to go. So I am not advocating for a big flashy shindig. But my thought was to get kind of citizens involved and determine,
What they want to do.
Well, back in the day, we used to always have, block parties and everything like that. I mean, it's like pretty much all we need to do is just have one big old block party.
Yeah, I mean, we've got this beautiful riverfront down there,
You know, a few years, a couple of years ago, when we had the golf course open, we mean, the Shriners came in, the clowns came in, and, you know, they did a lot with the kids and balloons and.
I think there's a lot we can do
Yeah.
without going huge and extravagant.
For our 75th, we ordered keychains, the nice little keychains that said 75th, you know, 75 years of continuing, so little things like that that we can maybe buy.
Yeah, and like
and
doing
pass out.
maybe local bands versus some big drama,
I've already been
expensive
racking
person.
my brain with who we could get that would cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Chances are it's
Yeah, I think if, depending on what got planned, I think one thing that would need to be considered is mills didn't charge anything. And I think it'd probably be reasonable to have at least some charges for something. You know, I mean, if you're gonna have a band and pay for certain things, you know, even if it's only a couple bucks, it helps offset some of the costs versus paying for it all and then going almost broke. So that
But if
would
we
be,
put together a band for 1/50th of the cost,
right,
we wouldn't have to.
need to charge.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
so that,
We waive the fees on like food trucks.
right,
and have
Right.
food
It-
trucks
right.
and-
battle of the bands. Robert must be volunteering for the citizen committee.
I'll be on it, I won't lead it.
I have
Yeah.
no
But
problem.
that's-
doing a planner.
But that's, my point
I
is,
mean, that's what I do slightly for a living is
why, I think that's great
planning
if
type
we,
stuff.
we get this far ahead.
Yeah.
I think we've got that opportunity to, you know, look at, all right, what makes sense?
Yeah.
You know,
And ask the public what they would want.
right, and it's not for us, it's
Right.
for the public, that's
Yeah,
just it,
we could,
you know? I don't think we need to put what we want, we need to do what the town wants to
Maybe
celebrate.
they don't want a bunch of
yeah,
Right.
you know,
bells and whistles, maybe they just want,
We could- with the bills, you could put out a, you know, thing with the bills, you know, a questionnaire that says, hey, you know, next year we're going to have our 100th anniversary. And, you know, if they would even just drop it by, you know, but we could at least send it out in the bills, say, you know, hey,
Survey.
we're looking at like a survey and, or create a survey monkey with a link on that where they can go to it and fill it out.
I can create something on Facebook page.
Yeah, and
Let's
get the feedback.
If we can get a group of 6, 10 people together, put their minds together and just think of ideas. And then, because to me, I mean, if we can get that group together and come up with ideas, then we have something, you know, put in a survey, you know.
Yeah.
What do you like the best? You know,
Exactly.
like I said, I won't even say the amount of money I thought about putting in the budget. In that realm. But in the end, also we can't, there's no sense in putting undue pressure on the town. You know, we had a balanced budget last year. I'm gonna do everything we can to do it again this year. And it's not like we just got flush with money in the meantime, but I think there's some opportunities there. Things we can look at. Then I think we could have a really good time out spending.
Yeah.
What's special about our town is, you know, you come up with ideas. Again, we have bigger projects that we want.
Or more, probably more important.
Yeah. We need to
I
do
thought it was
fire
like a
related.
war between the police department and fire department.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll have the water drainage ditch down there yet, but
Like something
Say
they used to
when.
do over in Kemmer at their what do they call it? Something mining days, but they had 2 construction companies. They ran a cable between 2 big loaders with like a barrel, and the fire departments would, it's like, you know, tug of war, but you're using water to shoot it back and forth. Of course, everybody gets wet, and people could sign up as teams, you know, and come in and they would battle back and forth.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
we can have dunk tanks, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, we haven't even started budget meetings yet. So usually we're in May, yeah, when we get those together, so.
So there's really not doing too much with that. My logical mind is thinking, get through the budget session, see what we're looking at, and then start planning for.
No, I was thinking go after it because we don't have to stick to whatever we put in the budget. We're just saying we're gonna set aside this much. We can always go look and ask for more, go after more. So in my opinion, that's why I wanted to get it out tonight is, we need the sooner the better. So,
But we need to get the committee set up.
yeah, that was my part of the
Okay.
thought is getting the committee set up, getting the ideas start flowing. To me, we've got a year for that money to figure out.
Maybe before we work on a committee, just seeing what the interests are of the town, because depending on how they respond to the survey, we may not have to do a committee. Just saying.
Well, so you know what
We
we
still
can
have to
do
have a
is,
plan.
is
Where
put
everything
it
comes
out,
together.
put it out there, you know, anybody interested in volunteering on a New Year's celebration.
And that could be part of that survey.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, we could have real generic, what would you like?
if you're interested in,
Are you willing
Planner.
to help? Are you willing to
Because-
volunteer?
100 people might respond with, we want this, but there might only be 3 that say, we're willing to put in the extra work.
Right.
So,
And to me, it's those ones putting in the extra work that are gonna drive this.
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
we may have everybody say, we want whatever. the
sure,
singer
so
is on
good at
TV
that,
tonight,
Robert.
but.
Good
you
at
know,
what?
I just
Yeah,
volunteer.
a lot of great ideas. A lot of- I mean, you just get a car show.
Lead it into a wall.
You can charge for
I'm
the
good at
car
that.
show.
Yeah.
Kind of counter cost.
Yeah, that's another great idea that could be there, so.
So what I hear everyone saying, just because I'm not clearly
Ken is
understanding. Well, I'm it, if that's it. So what I hear everyone saying is that it's fine to start discussing that. A committee, I heard you, but a committee would have to be set. A survey would go out to see the town's interest. Is
No,
that correct?
Yeah, I don't know that the survey couldn't start to gauge ideas and obtain committee members.
The only thing that I didn't get clarification on is who's driving all of that.
It would be
I just like clarification to know who's doing what in the beginning, so that it's not a bunch of people that are like out here doing all kinds of things and then no one's communicating, because 98% of the reason why there's miscommunication is because people aren't on the same page.
from
So
my,
I just want clarity in that, because
am I
that's where I'm
hearing
not
you
clear.
volunteer for that?
Volunteering to be on the planning committee or volunteering to spearhead it, or what are we talking about?
I think some, one of us is gonna have.
Volunteering to be the 100-year celebration coordinator? I
To
mean, do I get
Right.
a lovely pin and like, can it be orange
All
and
in
very
favor, say
vibrant?
aye.
Like, and then I'll talk to Brandy over here and like, I'm already thinking like, okay, like I've already got ideas here, but I need to know if that's what everybody is discussing. I need to know that that's like, you just need to tell me that that's what's supposed to happen. So I'm very well aware of like, cause I do a lot of projects.
I
got a
think
lot of
she's
stuff
just
going on,
trying to
so
get you to say,
I
hey,
need-
I'm in charge of
I need
this.
to know, yes, I need somebody to say, I need to know what your position is, so that there's not all kinds of people just, oh, Randy's putting out a survey, next thing you know, the chief of police is like trying to get this tug of war thing going on, and Janelle's over here trying to get the fire department to do something interesting, and then you got all these people who are like, oh, well, who's supposed to be wrangling everybody?
I think we need somebody in the lead of all of that.
Okay,
Do we have any volunteers?
I'll do it.
Okay. there you
There we
go.
go.
Perfect.
But I'm just not used to it.
All right, I can be in the back side of that.
Okay.
I
I just-
things to where.
I've just done enough of
There's a
these
board.
planning type things that I know that if you don't solidify in the beginning, you got a lot of people trying to do a lot of stuff and no one's talking. And there needs to be communication,
And that's-
effective communication.
That's why I felt that it needs to be driven by council, to be honest.
I'll be more than happy to be on the committee as well. I just didn't want to lead it.
I mean, I find myself in these positions anyway in my regular day-to-day life, so this isn't anything new for me. I just like to know what my position stand is, because I'm one of those people that I'll take it all on, and I'll make sure it all runs, but I don't wanna do that if like Brandy's taking it all on and she's running with it, and then we've got two separate people think that we're running the show, you know? I like clarity, I'm very black and white in that logical process, and I'm like, okay.
I'm on board with you.
Okay.
I'm just saying that I'm like a big orange pin that
I
says
think we can cut that.
100-year event coordinator. I'm just saying, I'll purchase it, so it's not the town's payments.
I
I'll
think it
purchase it.
should be the 100-year Grand Poobah.
The what?
Grand Poobah.
What's a,
Like
a
the-
grand
like the
poobah?
Did
big-
you ever watch the Flintstones when you were a kid?
I know.
A poopah or a poobah?
Grand Poobah.
The 100-year grand poobah. I'm 35.
Never
I
mind.
kind of like the 100 years or the grand poobah for the parade or
Yeah.
who they.
Oh, wait, no. Who's the Grinch guy?
Means you're the big wig. You're the go-to girl.
We'll just stick with your
I'm just like,
coordinator pin.
Okay, as long as it can be orange, just saying.
Blue
That's-
bows.
Okay, yeah.
I totally agree with everything you said, and that's what I think is important to somebody that drives the train.
Okay, so as the driver of the train,
You choose.
So whenever you want me to put it on social media, let me know.
And whenever you're ready for it to go on the water bills, let me know what you want in it. We'll type it up, we'll have you prove it, we'll get it in the water bills. Water bills, the,
Grand Poobah.
grand,
the utility bills fill out the first 1 day of each month.
okay.
Whenever you need to walk dogs, I'll do that too.
Well, if you want to walk my bulldogs, we'll talk about that too. Okay.
I'll be on the committee with you, but I ain't running it.
Okay, who's got a
That's what
pen?
everybody
Now, I
does.
always tell people, if I don't write things down, it didn't happen in my world. Thank you for, see?
Do you want a
See?
piece of paper?
I need like an orange pen here in this bag at all times. I'm good, I'm good.
I had a pen, I don't know what I did with it though.
100-year grand poobah. I don't even know how to spell it. I can add this to my resume. This is fabulous. I love celebrations.
Oh, it goes back way farther. It's not way farther than
Way farther than
Flintstones.
Well, and I'm just
Grand
saying that
Poobah.
grand, oh wow, I really spelled that wrong. Poobah.
Poobah.
So the Urban Dictionary is the title given to someone who holds an exalted position.
A person who is important or high ranking.
Fred Flintstone and his friend Barney Rubble were members
I
of
don't
the
need to
Royal
labor
Order of
the
Water
title, I
Buffalo
just got
Lodge.
excited about the orange pin, that was it.
And that's where I know it from. is the
Mayor and
Flintstones.
chief that have nothing on hand, and that's not.
But just to be nostalgic for you, sir, I might just have the pin say 100-year grand poobah, just to say this is an homage to the mayor.
I don't think we need to show my age.
That's your own deal, sir.
I opened my mouth.
It's gotta be a blinking one though, with noises.
The
Full pin,
orange.
orange,
What color lights are we gonna go with?
yellow.
I mean, it might flash.
Cheers, how do you spell your name?
I'm Tina Edwards.
on camera.
The true boss lady. The true grand poobah.
You hear that, honey?
I'll just be the background person as long as I can wear the orange pin, I don't care.
No, you're the grand poobah.
I'm the grand poobah. You know, I think I just want to put that on a pin because I think it's fun.
It literally
I
comes
just
from
got
the
promoted
Flintstones.
to grand poobah at the council work session.
In the Flintstones, they always go out to the lodge meeting. And the head of the lodge was the Grand Poobah.
Funny. Okay.
Did you not watch the Flintstones?
No, I did, but I don't, I mean, I was a Rugrats gal, but I mean, you know, I get it, but I mean, I did watch Flintstones and Charlie Brown and all that good stuff. I mean, I'm 35. I mean, I'm not super young. I mean, come on now. When am I gonna get to an age where people are taking me seriously as an adult? What, I gotta hit 50? Come on now, people, work with me. All right.
All right.
I have your number. I need your number.
I'll give it to you after.
I need your.
Yeah, I would strongly suggest that
And I
we
need yours.
adjourn before we
Yeah.
start throwing numbers
Well,
out.
yeah, but I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm pointing, so
Please.
everybody knows, don't leave.
We're still alive.
I know we're still alive. Hi, friends.
All right, well, I guess if we have no further business, we can adjourn.
I'm good.
Oh, I did,
I'll be done.
yeah, I believe so. Okay. Sorry to eat everybody's Monday night, but Chief and I have